My wife smiled at a circle of executives, laid her hand on another man's forearm, and said, "And this is my husband, Daniel." I was 3 feet behind her holding the silver presentation clicker she'd called me 3 times about. There are moments in a marriage when the truth doesn't arrive gradually. It doesn't creep in through unanswered texts or colder kisses or the way someone turns their phone face down at dinner. Sometimes it walks straight up to you in a room full of strangers, dressed in black tie, under a chandelier worth more than the car you drove there, and says its own name out loud. I remember every detail because shock has a way of sharpening the edges. The ballroom was on the 22nd floor of the Halcyon Tower in Midtown Manhattan. Gold light fell off crystal fixtures in soft sheets. Waiters in white jackets moved through the crowd with trays of champagne flutes. A string quartet was finishing a version of an old jazz standard near the east wall. Somebody had spent a fortune making the place look effortless. My wife had spent all week talking about this event like it was the biggest night of her career. Camille Avery Cross, Senior Partnerships Director at Rowan Vale Consulting. 34. Stunning in the way people write articles about. Smart enough to command a room. Controlled enough to make you think she was never rattled. The kind of woman who could look at a wrinkled schedule, a panicked assistant, and a room full of donors and make all of them believe everything was exactly on time. My wife. The woman I'd been married to for 6 years. The woman I'd spent the last 6 hours helping get ready for a work gala I had supposedly not been invited to. That part matters. At 4:10 that afternoon she stood in our bedroom in a navy silk gown while I fixed the clasp on a bracelet I'd bought her for our 5th anniversary and said, almost casually, "It's mostly internal. Senior staff, clients, board people. Spouses aren't really included this year." I looked up at her in the mirror. Not even for department heads. She kept smoothing a line that didn't exist in the fabric over her hip. "They're trying to keep it tight," she said. "Budget optics. End of quarter nonsense." It sounded thin even then, but I let it go. Because for the last year I had been letting a lot of things go. The late nights. The weekends she suddenly had to drop by the office for 30 minutes and somehow never returned before dark. The second phone she claimed was a temporary work device and then got weirdly protective about. The way she stopped tagging me in anything online. The way she started introducing me less. Not as in less often. I mean with less detail. I used to be my husband, Adrian. Then I became Adrian. Then, around certain people, I became nobody at all. Still, when she kissed my cheek on her way out at 5:35 and said, "Wish me luck," I did. I meant it. 2. That's the humiliating part people don't talk about. When betrayal finally reveals itself, you don't instantly transform into a suspicious genius who'd known all along. Half the time you're still in love enough to hope every odd thing has a reasonable explanation. At 7:18 my phone buzzed while I was reviewing an estimate in my home office. Camille. I answered on the first ring. "Hey. I need a favor," she said, already breathless. Music and voices swelled behind her. "My clicker is in the side pocket of the black garment bag in your car. The silver one, not the backup. I thought I packed it but I didn't. And my laptop adapter is probably in there too. Can you bring both?" I glanced at the time. "You said spouses weren't invited." There was a beat. Then her voice tightened a fraction. "You're not staying. Just drop them at reception. Please. My panel starts in 20 minutes. My first instinct was irritation. My second was habit. Because when you've spent years being the person who catches what someone else forgets, you stop treating it like a choice. You treat it like your role. "Fine," I said. "Text me the floor." 22. Use the west elevators. "Adrian, please hurry." The line clicked dead before I could say anything else. I should have heard the absence in that goodbye. No thanks. No sorry. No love you. Just urgency. Just expectation. Just the assumption that of course I would come running. I found the clicker exactly where she said it would be, tucked inside the garment bag beside her adapter and a pair of backup heels in tissue paper. I drove in from Tribeca through traffic so dense it felt physical. On the West Side Highway a black SUV nearly clipped my front bumper trying to slide into my lane. I barely reacted. My mind was on the text she'd sent me with the building access code and nothing else. No badge. No guest pass. No meet me downstairs. When I pulled up to Halcyon Tower, the doorman directed me to a side entrance for private events. Upstairs, the reception desk on 22 was unattended for all of 10 seconds before an anxious-looking woman in a headset hurried over. "Can I help you, sir? I'm dropping off something for Camille Cross. Senior Partnerships." I lifted the clicker and adapter. "She asked me to bring these up." The woman's face relaxed immediately. "Oh, thank God. She's been asking every 5 minutes if they got here. The panel just wrapped. They're in the donor ballroom now. If you want, I can take those in." That should have been the end of it. I should have handed her the bag, gotten back on the elevator, and driven home with my dignity still technically intact, if not entirely unwounded. Instead, from somewhere beyond the open ballroom doors, I heard Camille laugh. If you had known my wife, really known her, you'd understand why that stopped me. Camille had different laughs. There was the soft one she used on neighbors and waitstaff and people she needed to feel at ease. There was the bright, polished one she used in meetings. And there was a rare one, low and unguarded, that she used to give me when nobody else was around and something genuinely amused her. I heard that laugh now. Or what used to be mine of it. "It's no problem," I told the woman in the headset. "I can bring them." She hesitated, then gestured toward the ballroom. "Left side, near the stage." I thanked her and walked in. The room opened around me in mirrors and glass and warm amber light. There were maybe 200 people scattered across high-top tables and lounge groupings, all of them wrapped in that expensive Manhattan ease people practice until it looks genetic. My boots were clean, my charcoal suit was tailored, my watch cost more than most monthly rents, and for the first time in years I felt underdressed anyway. Not because of the clothes. Because I suddenly had the irrational certainty that I had shown up in the wrong life. I spotted Camille before she saw me. She stood near the center of the room beneath a suspended installation of winter branches threaded with tiny white lights. Her hair was swept up. Diamond drops flashed when she turned her head. One hand cradled a champagne flute. The other rested lightly on the sleeve of a tall blond man in a midnight tuxedo. He leaned in when she spoke. Too close. That was my first clear thought. Not husband. Not affair. Just too close. The kind of close people develop when they already know the contours of each other. An older couple approached them. The woman wore emerald satin and the kind of posture that suggested board chairs, private schools, and inherited confidence. The man beside her had silver hair and a face I recognized from Camille's company website. Arthur Bell. Chairman Emeritus. Major donor. One of the men whose approval apparently mattered enough for me not to merit an invitation. I was still half hidden behind a floral arrangement and a passing waiter when I heard Arthur say, "Camille, marvelous panel. And have you introduced Daniel to Marjorie yet?" Camille turned fully toward the couple. The blond man smiled with the ease of someone born inside rooms like that. Then Camille touched his forearm and said, clearly, warmly, without even the smallest hitch in her voice. "And this is my husband, Daniel." The world did not spin. It narrowed. There wasn't some dramatic ringing in my ears. No drop tray somewhere behind me. No cinematic gasp from the crowd. The quartet kept playing. A waiter passed with canapés. Someone near the bar laughed too loudly at a story they probably wouldn't remember tomorrow. Reality did the cruelest possible thing. It continued. While mine broke. Marjorie Bell smiled. We've heard so much about you. Daniel extended his hand like the roll fit perfectly. Only good things, I hope. Camille laughed. That same laugh. Sharp enough to cut me open. I don't know how long I stood there. 5 seconds maybe. 10. Long enough to hear Arthur say, a husband who lets us borrow her this much must be a patient man. And Daniel reply, I do what I can. Then Camille reached up and straightened his bow tie. It was a small gesture. Intimate in a way that told me more than a kiss would have. That wasn't improvisation. That was familiarity. I took one step back. And another. The clicker in my hand felt absurdly heavy. I could have walked straight over. I could have said, in a voice loud enough to stop the room, actually, I'm her husband. I could have watched the blood drain from her face and made the scene people later whisper about at brunch. Part of me wanted to. God, part of me wanted to. But another part, colder and older, understood something important before the rest of me caught up. Public humiliation is satisfying for about 6 minutes. After that, you're left with consequences. And I had the sudden instinct that whatever I had just witnessed was bigger than one filthy sentence in a ballroom. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. I stayed quiet. I moved toward the side corridor, stopped at an empty cocktail table, and set down the adapter and clicker. Then I pulled out my phone, turned on the camera, and zoomed in just enough to catch the next thing that happened. Camille saw Daniel's cuff was misaligned. She fixed it. Then Arthur Bell raised his glass toward them. To the future, he said. Daniel clinked his flute against Camille's. And Camille, my wife, looked right at him with a softness I had not seen in months and said, to the future. I recorded 12 seconds. That was all. Enough to establish context. Enough to prove I had not imagined it. Enough to remind myself later that the truth, when it came, had announced itself in her own voice. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and turned toward the elevators. Halfway there, somebody called my name. For a second I thought it was her. It wasn't. It was Leah Moreno, one of Camille's former assistants. She had been to our apartment twice for strategy sessions and once for a holiday dinner 3 years earlier. Smart kid. Quick eyes. The kind of employee who noticed everything and said little unless necessary. She was standing near the hallway to the restrooms with a tablet in one hand. Adrian? She said again, more uncertain this time. What are you doing here? I don't know what my face looked like, but whatever she saw made her expression change instantly. Camille asked me to bring her clicker, I said. Leah looked from my empty hands to the ballroom behind me, where Camille was still smiling in Daniel's orbit. Then Leah went still in the way people do when they realize they're suddenly inside a problem they had hoped was theoretical. Oh, she said. Just that. One syllable. And inside it, pity. Not surprise. Pity. That hurt more than the introduction. Because surprise would have meant tonight was an anomaly. Pity meant there had already been a narrative. One I was the last to hear. You knew, I said. Leah swallowed. Adrian, You knew. Her eyes darted once toward the ballroom doors. Not exactly, she whispered. Not everything. People just assume things. She never corrected them. Then later it got more complicated. My chest felt hollow. How long? She shook her head. I really shouldn't. How long, Leah? Maybe it was the way I said her name. Maybe it was because I looked less angry than wrecked. Maybe she was 27 and too decent to lie well under pressure. Since spring, she said quietly. At least publicly. Maybe earlier privately. I don't know. Spring. It was November. 8 months. 8 months of assumptions. 8 months of smiles. 8 months of my wife letting another man exist in her professional life as the role that legally belonged to me. My mouth went dry. Who is he? Daniel Mercer. Executive Director in Institutional Relations. Arthur Bell's godson. He's being fast-tracked for partner. Of course he was. Leah looked like she might cry. I'm sorry, she said. I thought maybe you knew. She talked about things in this vague way, and then whenever someone asked directly she would redirect. By summer people were just saying you two were separated. Then after the Hamptons retreat. I snapped my head up. The what? Too late. She'd already said it. Leah pressed her lips together. Camille's Hamptons retreat had supposedly been a 3-day women's leadership summit in June. I had stayed home with a kidney stone and still ordered flowers to be delivered to her room. It wasn't a women's summit, was it? I asked. Leah closed her eyes for half a second. No. I laughed once. It sounded wrong. Like it came from somebody else. A man in a velvet dinner jacket brushed past us on his way to the bar. Somewhere behind me Camille laughed again, and my body reacted to the sound before my mind did, a stupid old reflex of recognition and affection. I hated that. I hated how love keeps operating for a while after trust has been pronounced dead. Don't say anything to her yet, Leah said suddenly. I looked at her. Why? She hesitated. Because if what I think is happening is actually happening, she'll get ahead of it before you even leave the building. She is very good at narrative control. Narrative control. That sounded like Camille. Not liar. Not adulterer. Not coward. Narrative control. Corporate language for making the truth wear nicer shoes. I nodded once. Thanks, I said. Then I walked to the elevator and left. The ride down was silent except for the soft mechanical hum and the blood moving in my ears. On the street, November had teeth. Wind funneled between buildings hard enough to cut through wool. I stood under the awning of Halcyon Tower and stared at the revolving doors while people in formal wear drifted in and out behind the glass. My reflection looked unchanged. Same 6'2" frame. Same dark overcoat. Same face Camille used to touch with both hands when she was tired and wanted to be held without speaking. Nothing on me announced that my marriage had just split open in public while the city kept breathing around it. I got in my car, shut the door, and finally let myself shake. Not sob. Not rage. Shake. Like my body had received a voltage my mind couldn't process. I sat there for almost 10 minutes with my hands on the wheel, replaying the sentence. And this is my husband, Daniel. Not this is Daniel. Not this is my colleague. Not this is a joke gone too far. My husband. Possessive. Confident. Practiced. The kind of lie you don't arrive at accidentally. When I finally drove home, I took the long way down the west side because I couldn't stand the thought of tunnels. I needed air, even if it came through cracked windows like knives. Every memory of the last year started rearranging itself in the light of what I'd heard. Camille insisting on going by Avery professionally because Cross doesn't test well in donor-facing spaces. Camille saying the annual retreat had limited capacity, so no spouses. Camille asking me not to stop by her office anymore because security had changed visitor policies. Camille laughing when I suggested we host her team for dinner and saying, they don't need to see me in domestic mode. At the time I'd interpreted all of it through the lens of ambition. She was climbing. She was under pressure. She was trying to manage image and timing and office politics in a world that rewarded polish and punished missteps. I had admired that about her once. Hell, I had helped build it. Because 6 years earlier when we got married in a courthouse on Center Street with 2 friends as witnesses and rain soaking the cuffs of my suit pants. Camille wasn't the woman in the ballroom. She was a non-profit coordinator with student debt, thrifted blazers, and a laugh that burst out of her like she didn't care who heard it. I was 32 then, 3 years into owning Cross Restoration Group, a commercial interiors company I had started with one van, a borrowed table saw, and more arrogance than money. She loved that story. Said it made her believe hard things could be built twice if necessary. Back then she introduced me to everyone. "This is Adrian," she'd say, and her whole face would turn toward me like the fact of me delighted her. My husband. My favorite person. The one who made all this possible. Funny how language keeps receipts even after people stop meaning what they say. By the time I parked outside our building in Tribeca, it was 9:26. I didn't go upstairs immediately. I stayed in the car and opened the video I'd taken. 12 seconds. Camille turning. Her hand on Daniel's arm. Her mouth shaping the lie. No context in the world could save that sentence. I watched it 3 times. Then I texted one person. Graham Ellis. My attorney. Also my college roommate. Also the most emotionally conservative man I've ever met. Need you available tomorrow morning. Urgent. Divorce level urgent. He responded in under a minute. Call now. I stared at the screen. Then I typed. Can't. Need to think first. Just be ready. Another immediate reply. I'm ready. That steadied me more than it should have. I finally went upstairs. The apartment was dark except for the kitchen pendants I had left on above the island. The rosemary chicken I'd put in the oven earlier and then turned off before leaving still sat under foil. 2 plates were on the counter because some part of me had believed, even after the gala nonsense, that we'd eat late and laugh about how chaotic her night had been. I looked at those plates for a long time. Then I put them back in the cabinet one by one. At 9:41 Camille texted. Got the clicker. Thanks. Nothing else. No explanation for the non-invitation. No apology for sending me across Manhattan like a courier. Certainly no mention that she'd introduced another man as her husband in front of donors. I didn't answer. At 10:03 she sent another. Running late. Don't wait up. I actually smiled at that. Not because it was funny. Because the confidence was obscene. She had just detonated our marriage and still assumed I was home warming leftovers. I walked into my office, shut the door, and started doing the least romantic thing possible. I began an inventory. Not because I had fully turned cold. Because grief, in its earliest form, often disguises itself as administration. I opened our shared banking dashboard. Joint checking, savings, household account, 2 credit cards. Nothing glaring at first glance. Then I opened the account linked to the supplemental corporate card I'd given Camille 3 years earlier for shared expenses when her travel schedule increased. Most charges were normal. Car service. Dinners. Hotels for client travel. Department store purchases that blurred work and personal enough I had stopped tracking them carefully months ago. Then I saw a jewelry charge from August. $12,400. Maison Dupré. I knew that store. Because I had bought Camille earrings there the Christmas before last. I scrolled farther. Montauk Harbor House. 2-night stay in June, billed during the exact dates of the so-called Women's Leadership Summit. Private car service from Montauk to Manhattan. A dinner at Celandine. $386. 2 guests. Another hotel charge from September in Boston on a weekend she told me she was at a Grant Strategy offsite in Philadelphia. I felt the room tilt, not physically, but morally. Like the floor beneath the last year had been built from plywood painted to resemble stone. At 10:22 I got up, went to our bedroom, and opened Camille's closet. The navy gown she'd worn tonight wasn't there. Neither was the cream cashmere wrap she'd asked me, specifically, not to get makeup on when I helped her into it. But on the top shelf, behind stacked sweater boxes, sat a slim white shopping bag from Maison Dupré. Empty. I stood there holding the bag by its string handles, and I understood something with terrible clarity. This was not a crack in a marriage. This was an architecture. A system. A parallel life with budgets and logistics and cover stories and enough repetition to become routine. And if I wanted to survive what came next, I needed to stop thinking like a hurt husband for at least one night. I needed to think like the man who had built a company by documenting everything and assuming that if something could go wrong, sentiment would only make it worse. So I set the bag on the bed. I went back to my office. I opened a blank document. And at the top, I typed Camille. Timeline. Then I started writing down every lie I could remember. The first one on the page wasn't even about Daniel. It was smaller than that. Or at least it had seemed smaller when I first heard it. March 14th. Camille said she had to miss dinner with my mother because her team was hosting an emergency donor strategy session. At 11:40 that night she came home smelling like wood smoke and sea salt, which made no sense in Midtown in early spring. When I asked how dinner went, she blinked once too long and said, "Brutal." Everyone wanted impossible revisions. The next morning I found a tiny gray feather on the passenger seat of her car. I remember holding it between my fingers and thinking maybe it came from somebody's coat. I remember deciding not to care. April 2nd. She told me she couldn't make my company's 10th anniversary dinner because Rowan Vale had flown in a Swiss Family Foundation and she had to host. That night one of my project managers posted a photo from the dinner on Instagram. In the background, blurred but unmistakable, was Camille's phone on our kitchen counter where she'd supposedly forgotten it while entertaining billionaires. When I mentioned it the next day, she laughed and said she'd borrowed Leah's charger, then kissed my cheek like my question was adorable. April 28th. She insisted on switching gyms because the one we'd been using for years was suddenly too influencer-y. A month later, while grabbing my duffel from the trunk, I saw a parking validation slip from a private club on East 67th. Members only. Old money. Not our gym. She said a client used the conference room there. I wrote every one of those moments down now, and each memory arrived carrying brothers and cousins I'd ignored at the time. That is the curse of hindsight. Once the pattern reveals itself, every exception applies for retroactive membership. By 11:15 I had 2 full pages. Dates. Locations. Charges. Trips. Words that had sounded plausible until they didn't. Then I did something that made me feel cheap and ancient and exhausted all at once. I opened Camille's public Instagram. Not the account I followed. The professional one. Camille Avery. No cross. No husband. No home. Just crisp event photos, fundraising panels, donor breakfasts, museum galas, women in leadership lunches. And captions written in that smooth polished language ambitious people use when they want to sound warm but not personal. Honored to convene. Grateful to collaborate. Inspired by the mission. Committed to impact. I scrolled back to spring. There he was. Daniel Mercer. Never tagged in a way that screamed affair. That would have been sloppy. Camille was never sloppy. But he appeared too often in the edges of frames. Reflection in a window. Shoulder at a table. Jacket sleeve beside hers at a rooftop reception. A blurred grin in the background of a Hamptons dock photo she captioned leadership offsite. And once, in July, a black and white shot from a charity tennis weekend where his hand rested at the base of her back with the casual ownership of a man who had long since stopped asking permission. The comments underneath were worse. You two are always the dream team. Power couple energy. Obsessed with this duo. One woman I'd never met had written, finally got to meet your husband tonight, such a gentleman. Camille had liked the comment. Not replied. Not corrected. Liked. I stared at that tiny red heart longer than I should have. Because sometimes the evidence that ruins you isn't the dramatic thing. It's the administrative thing. The little click of approval. The lie turned routine enough to require no effort at all. At 11:32 my phone rang. Camille. I let it go to voicemail. She called again immediately. Then again. On the fourth call I answered but didn't speak. Adrian? She said. Her voice was lower now, careful. Homeward voice. Why aren't you answering my texts? I kept looking at the comments she had liked. Finally I said, how was the event? A pause. Long successful. Why? The restraint it took not to laugh felt athletic. Who is Daniel? I asked. Nothing. Not a gasp. Not confusion. Nothing. Silence tells the truth faster than language when somebody gets caught in real time. When she did speak, her voice had changed again. Sharper. Alert. Where are you? Interesting answer. Adrian, where are you? At home, I said. In the apartment I pay for. In the office where I just finished watching a video of my wife introducing another man as her husband. So let's try again. Who is Daniel? If the ballroom lie was the moment my marriage cracked, this silence was the moment it split clean through. Because once Camille understood that denial was impossible, she didn't even try the obvious fiction. She didn't say I misheard. She didn't say it was a joke. She didn't say I was overreacting. Instead she went straight to strategy. I can explain, she said. Everyone can explain. That's what explanation is for. It's what people reach for when the facts arrive before the framing does. Come explain it here, I said. I'm in a car with colleagues. Get out. Adrian, don't do this over the phone. I looked at the jewelry charge again. I think that ship sailed around the time you assigned my title to another man. Her breathing changed. I knew her rhythms well enough to hear anger trying to outrun panic. It is not what you're making it into. Then make it into what it is. Another pause. Then, carefully, Daniel and I worked closely together. Some people at the firm made assumptions. Correcting them in that moment would have created unnecessary questions in front of donors. I closed my eyes. There it was. Not remorse. Not shame. Efficiency. She had chosen the lie because the truth would have been inconvenient. So you introduced him as your husband to avoid awkwardness, I said. I was managing the room. Managing the room. Yes. I repeated it once more, softly, because I wanted to hear how insane it sounded with both of us sober. Managing the room. She exhaled. You don't understand how those spaces work. I sat back in my chair. That sentence didn't just wound me. It clarified the whole architecture. You don't understand how those spaces work. Translation, I made myself legible to the world I wanted, and you no longer fit the version of me I sell inside it. Except I did understand those spaces. Just not from the side she imagined. I understood hierarchy. I understood presentation. I understood how money makes certain kinds of manners possible. My company, Cross Restoration Group, had spent the last decade quietly rebuilding lobbies, executive suites, hotel bars, and law firm conference floors for exactly the kind of people who populated her ballroom. I had been in more back rooms with developers and donors and private equity men than Camille ever knew. The difference was, I never mistook their approval for character. Were you ever going to tell me? I asked. Her answer came too fast. Tell you what? Don't insult me. This time she lost a little control. I am trying very hard not to escalate this until I get home. That's generous. Adrian. Camille. We sat in each other's names for a second like duelists checking distance. Then she said the thing that, even now, I think I will remember longer than the introduction. I didn't think you'd be there. Not I'm sorry. Not I made a terrible mistake. Just a logistical failure. I wasn't supposed to witness my own replacement. No, I said. I guess I wasn't on the guest list. She hung up. I stared at my phone. Then I put it face down and texted Graham again. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. My office. He replied, on my way there if you need me tonight. I typed back, morning. Need clean head. I didn't sleep. People say that like it means they tossed around and woke up tired. I mean I did not sleep. I showered at midnight because my skin felt wrong. I changed the sheets because the bed smelled like her perfume. I made coffee at 2:06 and never drank it. At 3:11 I sat on the living room floor with Camille's old photo boxes spread around me and looked at a version of us I could no longer reconcile with the woman in the ballroom. There was one from our second year together at Orchard Beach. She had no makeup on, sunburn across her nose, my Yankees cap shoved backward on her head. She was grinning into the wind, one hand on my chest, the other holding a hot dog she'd insisted counted as a vegetable if relish was involved. There was one from the courthouse wedding. Me in a navy suit I could barely afford. Her in a cream dress we bought off the rack because we told ourselves we'd do a bigger ceremony later when life slowed down. Life never slows down for people like us. It just changes where it extracts payment. When Camille and I met, she was running development events for a children's literacy nonprofit and sharing a railroad apartment in Brooklyn with a roommate who sold handmade candles on Etsy and cried every time a package went missing. I was working 14-hour days building my company and sleeping with invoices under my pillow like a lunatic. We met at a charity renovation project I had donated labor to. She showed up in flat shoes and a raincoat too thin for October, carrying clipboards and trying to convince 3 exhausted volunteers to repaint a hallway for a second time because the donor scheduled for the photo op had delayed by 45 minutes. I watched her manage 6 minor disasters without becoming mean. That got my attention before anything else did. She watched me climb a ladder and rebuild a warped doorframe in 20 minutes after the volunteer crew mangled it. That got hers. We got tacos after cleanup because the catered food had been whisked away to impress somebody else. She told me she wanted more. Not more money specifically, though she wouldn't have objected. More scale. More influence. More rooms where decisions actually got made. I told her ambition looked good on honest people. She laughed and said, "Careful. That's almost flirting." I said, "Almost." Back then, her ambition felt like a torch. Warm. Useful. Alive. Not a blowtorch turned against everything inconvenient. When we moved in together, my business was still fragile enough that one delayed insurance payout could put payroll at risk. Camille saw all of it. The nights I sat with spreadsheets until 2 in the morning. The panic attacks I disguised as overcaffeination. The way I would go silent for an hour before a major bid because losing one contract then meant losing 3 months of runway. She held all of that without contempt. Which is why what came later felt so impossible to map onto the woman I married. She used to be proud of where I came from. I grew up in Yonkers above my father's auto body shop. My mother taught second grade for 31 years and still writes thank you notes like she expects the mail to report back to God. We were not refined. We were not connected. We were not invited to the kind of rooms where champagne appears before questions. But we were solid. I believed Camille loved that solidity. Maybe she did. Maybe she loved it until she mistook it for scenery. Around year 3 of our marriage, after my company stabilized and the expansion into corporate interior restoration started paying real money, Camille told me she wanted to pivot into private philanthropy and institutional partnerships. Nonprofits are noble, she said one night over takeout on the couch, but I am tired of begging rich people to care. I want to be in the rooms where the checks originate. I asked what that required. A master's program. Networking. Better clothes. Time. So we made a plan like married people do when they still think planning and loyalty belong to the same religion. I covered tuition for Columbia's executive program. I took over more of the household load. I hired a part-time housekeeper because her coursework and my travel were chewing through every free hour we had. When she needed to attend donor dinners, I bought the gowns even when she said they were too expensive. When she doubted herself before interviews, I coached her in the kitchen while sauce burned on the stove. When Rowan Vale finally hired her, she cried into my neck and said, "We did it. We." It is amazing how many marriages die with plural pronouns still in their mouths. For the first year at Rowan Vale, she seemed grateful. Tired, yes. Driven. Obviously. But grateful. She brought home stories about eccentric donors and impossible board members. She mocked the little vanities of people who treated charitable giving like branding. She still came to my company holiday party and introduced herself as the wife of the loud contractor who couldn't stop rescuing old buildings. Then the promotion started. Not huge at first. A title bump. A travel budget. More direct access to senior leadership. The tone of her stories changed before the facts did. She stopped mocking the wealthy and started translating them. Stopped rolling her eyes at status signals and started explaining which ones mattered. Stopped wearing her wedding ring to every event because, she said, it snagged on fabrics and made handshakes awkward. That was the official reason. The unofficial one, I think now, was simpler. A ring connects your image to a private promise. And private promises were becoming inconvenient to the character she was rehearsing. By 4 a.m. the apartment windows were beginning to pale. I had our entire financial history open across 2 monitors. And I had a headache that felt metallic. At 6:12 I heard the front door unlock. Camille came in barefoot, heels in one hand, phone in the other, moving quietly the way guilty people do when they want credit for not disturbing the person they disturbed hours ago. She stopped when she saw the light under my office door. A second later she pushed it open. Her makeup was still flawless except for the lipstick, which had worn off. Her hair had loosened around the temples. She looked stunning. She looked like a stranger wearing my wife's face. "You've been up all night," she said. "You introduced another man as your husband." No preamble. No courtesy. I was too tired for choreography. She closed the door behind her. "Adrian, if you're going to keep repeating that sentence without context. What context improves it?" Her jaw tightened. The event was high stakes. Donor optics matter. Daniel and I have been positioned as a team for months. Arthur and Marjorie Bell are extremely conservative about presentation. They like stability. Familiar narratives. It wasn't the place for a correction that would spin off into gossip and distract from the fundraising goals. I actually laughed then. Not loudly. Just enough to make her flinch. So my marriage became collateral because somebody rich prefers neat stories. Don't make it sound like that. Sound like what happened. She stepped farther into the room and set her heels down. "You are personalizing a strategic moment." That sentence told me more about her than any affair ever could. Not because it was heartless, though it was. Because she genuinely believed it was intelligent. She believed if she used enough polished language, the betrayal would downgrade itself into optics. "Are you sleeping with him?" I asked. There it was. The only question that matters once all the elegant synonyms are stripped out. Camille looked at me for a long second. Then she said, very quietly, "That's not the first issue we should be discussing." Which is not a no. It never was. "Were you in Montauk with him in June?" Her eyes flicked once to my screens. Then back to me. "You went through my accounts. Our accounts. You invaded my privacy." I nodded slowly. "And you outsourced my marriage." For the first time that night, actual emotion cracked through her composure. Anger. Not shame. Anger. You have no idea what pressure I've been under, she said. No idea what it takes to move in those rooms without the right family, the right school, the right name. I built that credibility from nothing. Every mistake gets magnified. Every perception matters. Daniel helped open doors that would have stayed shut for years. So you opened your legs, too? The words came out before I could refine them, ugly and hot. I don't say things like that. Or I didn't then. She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. Wow, she said. You don't get to perform outrage. And you don't get to reduce everything I've built to sex. Then explain the jewelry. Explain Boston. Explain Hamptons. Explain why your assistant looked at me like the village idiot. Explain why strangers online think Daniel Mercer is your husband and you keep liking their comments. Explain any of that without insulting both of us. She stared at me. Then, in a tone so cold it could have frosted glass, she said, you wouldn't understand the world I'm trying to survive in. There it was again. The contempt beneath the ambition. Not new, maybe. Just finally unhidden. I looked at the woman I had financed, defended, loved, and planned a future around, and I realized the scariest part was not that she had lied. It was that she had recategorized me. In her mind I was no longer partner, witness, or home. I was a legacy system. Useful while the upgrade was in progress. Annoying once it was complete. I stood up slowly from my chair. You need to leave the apartment for a few days, I said. Her eyebrows lifted. Excuse me? You heard me. I live here. The title is in my trust, Camille. You know that. I am not locking you out. I am telling you that after tonight, I am not sharing a bed or a kitchen or air with you until my attorney tells me I have to. Pack what you need. Be gone by 8. Color rose in her face. You think you can just evict your wife because you're hurt? No, I said. I think I can refuse to host the person who humiliated me in public and then came home asking for strategic nuance. She folded her arms. If you do this, you are making something temporary permanent. I looked at her for a long time. Then I said the truest thing I'd spoken all night. You already did that in the ballroom. For one suspended second I thought she might cry. Not because of me. Because tears are what people reach for when control starts slipping and they need the room to change shape. But she didn't. Camille rarely gave up visible ground. Instead she straightened, picked up her heels, and said, fine. I have an early breakfast meeting anyway. Of course she did. She turned for the door. Then stopped without facing me. Daniel isn't my husband, she said. The cruelty of that line was almost elegant. As if technical accuracy could still save her. As if the knife mattered less because she wanted to remind me it wasn't legally registered. No, I said. He was just close enough to borrow the title. She left without another word. I listened to the wheels of her suitcase cross the hallway 20 minutes later. Then the front door closed. I sat back down at my desk, opened a new page under the timeline, and added a final note for the night. She is not sorry. That changed everything. Graham arrived at 7:52 with black coffee, no tie, and the expression of a man prepared to discover which version of disaster he'd been invited into. He has known me since sophomore year at Fordham. Back when I still believed stress was a sign of seriousness and he still believed people could be reasoned into behaving ethically if presented with the right case law. Time corrected both of us. He stepped into my office, took one look at my face, and set the coffee down without speaking. How bad? He asked finally. I slid my phone across the desk with the 12-second video cued. He watched it once. Then again. Then he set the phone down carefully, like it might explode if handled too casually. Jesus, he said. Helpful legal insight. I'm still warming up. He leaned back. Do you want the emotional answer or the useful one? Useful. Good. Emotional answer later, when we're drinking something expensive and you're far enough removed not to do anything stupid. He nodded toward the screens. Show me everything. So I did. The charges. The timeline. The Instagram comments. The Hamptons trip. The Maison Dupré purchase. My notes from the call. By the time I finished, the sky outside had gone from pearl to flat winter gray. Graham rubbed one hand over his mouth. Okay. First, separate access immediately. Not as revenge. As triage. New passwords on everything she knows. Free supplemental card pending review. Move liquid reserves that are clearly premarital or business linked out of joint reach where legally appropriate. Do not touch anything that will make you look vindictive in court. We are going to be cleaner than a surgical suite. I nodded. Second, he said, do not confront the other man. Not yet. Maybe not at all. Men love getting pulled into dramas where they think they matter. Your issue is your wife and the paper trail. I nodded again. Third, and this is the one you're not going to enjoy, document your own behavior too. Every text. Every call. Every time you ask for separation or access or explanation. Women like Camille, he held up a hand before I could react, ambitious, image-conscious, practiced at institutional language, sometimes pivot fast when exposed. They start using words like volatile and controlling and unsafe. Maybe unfairly. Maybe not. But either way, we need facts before feelings get memified. Memified. That was Graham. Even in catastrophe he sounded faintly annoyed by the existence of jargon. You think she'd do that? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. I think, he said at last, that a person who can introduce another man as her husband with that level of calm is already living inside a story where ethics are subordinate to outcome. That doesn't make her monstrous. It makes her dangerous. Dangerous. The word landed with unpleasant precision. Because up until then, some naive part of me was still sorting her into emotional categories. Faithless. Ashamed. Selfish. All true, probably. But danger is operational. Danger alters how you move. By 8:40 Graham had helped me map out an initial sequence. Change the building access code. Notify management that no guest access was to be granted to Camille without my written approval until further notice due to domestic legal separation. Not because I wanted her barred dramatically, but because our building staff had a terrible habit of helping familiar faces bypass policy in the name of discretion. Freeze the supplemental card. Alert my finance director that any unusual business requests involving Camille were to be routed to me directly. Pull 3 years of statements. Back up everything to a secure drive. And, most importantly, say almost nothing in writing that could later be weaponized as instability. No accusations. No threats. No midnight essays about betrayal. Facts only. At 9:12 Camille texted. I need to come by for clothes before lunch. We should talk like adults. Graham glanced at me. Do not touch the sarcasm button. I typed. You can retrieve personal items between 12 o'clock and 12:30. Building will require prior notice. Discussion can happen through counsel for now. She replied within 10 seconds. Counsel? Seriously? I let Graham answer that one for me. Yes, he mouthed. So I sent. Yes. 3 pulsing dots appeared. Disappeared. Reappeared. Finally. This is excessive. I didn't answer. Because excessive was introducing another man as your husband in public and then objecting to administrative consequences the next morning. Around 10, after Graham left to draft preliminary separation language, I called into my company's weekly operations check-in and ran it like nothing had happened. Roofing delays in Jersey. Insurance issue on the Soho Hotel project. Union schedule shift in Long Island City. A cracked marble slab at a Park Avenue lobby restoration that would cost somebody, likely me, another $8,000. I handled all of it. Because work, unlike marriage, responds predictably when you respect process. Then, at 10:47, while reviewing vendor invoices, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. Need to talk. It's Leah. Not safe on company channels. I stared at it for a second. Then typed. Call. She called immediately. Her voice was low, rushed. I only have a few minutes. Camille's in a breakfast debrief and Daniel's with Arthur. I deleted our text chain before messaging you. Okay. I shouldn't be doing this. Then don't. No, she said, too fast. I need to. I just need you to understand I'm not trying to create more damage. I think you've been operating with maybe 10% of the picture. The calm I had borrowed all morning thinned. Go on. People at the firm don't think Daniel's just your replacement in public, she said. They think he and Camille are effectively already building a life together. I felt my fingers tighten around the phone. What does that mean? It means she's talked about an apartment. Not by address. Just that she was close to finally being in a place that matched where she was headed. It means she referred to your marriage once as a starter chapter. It means she told at least 3 people that you were a decent man but fundamentally not built for the world she was entering. I didn't say anything. Sometimes silence is the only dignity available. Leah kept going, maybe because stopping would have forced her to feel what she was saying. She also implied you were difficult about money, which I know is false because I've literally submitted expense paperwork she put on the household card without anyone blinking. And she said. She stopped. Said what? Leah exhaled. She said she spent years trying not to feel guilty that she'd outgrown the life she married. There are insults that attack your pride. And there are insults that attack your history. That one did both. Outgrown. As if the man who paid her tuition, bought her time, held her panic, and rearranged his own life around her ambition was just an old blazer she no longer wore because the tailoring read too middle class. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Her answer came immediately. Because my father cheated on my mother for 6 years, and everyone around him helped maintain the fiction because he was generous and useful and good at making people feel provincial for naming what was happening. And I watched my mother go insane trying to prove something every room already knew. I'm not doing that to another person if I can help it. I closed my eyes. Thank you, I said. There's more. Her voice dropped further. I think there may be expense fraud. That got my attention in a different register. Explain. Spousal travel reimbursements. Event hospitality. Certain donor dinners. Daniel has been coded as her spouse on at least 2 outside-hosted travel manifests because it simplified rooming optics. Once for Boston. Once for a Palm Beach donor retreat. Maybe more. I only noticed because she asked me to relabel a guest line before forwarding it to finance. She said the hosting foundation was conservative and preferred married pairings at seated dinners. I assumed Daniel and she were married or close enough that HR knew. Later I realized something was off, but by then I was already halfway out of that team. I sat forward. Do you have proof? Not on my personal devices. Maybe in archived reimbursement packets if they haven't been cleaned. But if anyone audits the event files, it'll show. A separate line of thought opened in my head. Not vengeance. Not yet. Consequence. Because lying to me was one thing. Using institutional records to formalize the lie was another. Leah, I said carefully, I am not asking you to steal anything. Good, she said, almost relieved. Because I won't. But if someone official requests the files, I will tell the truth. After we hung up, I wrote down every word I could remember from the call. Then I forwarded the notes to Graham. He responded 2 minutes later. Do not contact firm. Yet. If fraud exists, let it emerge through proper channel. Preserve yourself first. He was right. He usually is when emotions are involved. At noon Camille arrived with sunglasses, a camel coat, and the kind of posture people use when they want to imply that the person forcing consequences is being gauche. The concierge called up. I told him to send her to the service elevator, not the private foyer. Petty? Maybe. Also practical. I did not want a performance in our lobby. She entered the apartment with a garment bag over one shoulder and a leather weekender in hand. Service elevator? She asked. Counsel suggested minimizing spectacle. Your counsel is dramatic. You don't get to use that word with me anymore. Something in my tone must have registered because she set the bag down more gently. I came for clothes, she said. Not a fight. Then take clothes. She walked to the bedroom. I stayed in the kitchen where I could see the entryway and hear drawers opening. A marriage reduced to acoustics. Hangers sliding. Zippers. Cabinet doors. The muted violence of somebody removing herself from a shared life one object at a time. After a few minutes she returned and stood across the island from me. How much did you tell Graham? I looked up from the document I wasn't actually reading. Enough. Meaning? Meaning he knows I watched you assign my role to Daniel in front of your donors. She flinched, just once, at the bluntness. You keep repeating it like that because you want it to sound obscene. It was obscene. No. It was a mistake. Those aren't opposites. She pulled off her sunglasses and pinched the bridge of her nose. Adrian, I need you to understand something without getting reactive. The reason this got so far out of hand is because every time I tried to raise concerns about us, you turned practical immediately. Solutions. Schedules. Renovations. Trips. You fix logistics because it lets you avoid emotional complexity. I stared at her. It was almost impressive. The pivot. Within 24 hours of being caught, she was already editing the archive. Now her betrayal was my emotional illiteracy. Her affair was my insufficient nuance. The lie in the ballroom was a symptom of my preference for action items. Did you ever say the words, I am unhappy and considering leaving? I asked. She crossed her arms. Not like that. Did you ever say, I am involved with someone else? Because I wasn't. She stopped herself. Too late. Weren't what? I asked softly. It was complicated. Ah. The native language of cowards. Her face hardened. You know what? Fine. Yes. Daniel and I crossed lines. Emotionally first. Then otherwise. Happy? No. But there it was. A confession stripped of dignity by how reluctant it had been. How long? I don't know exactly. That's a lie. Spring, maybe. Late spring. Which meant while I was ordering flowers to the Hampton summit and sending her voice notes about how proud I was. I looked away because I didn't want her to see how much that detail still had the power to physically hurt. She noticed anyway. Of course she did. Camille always noticed vulnerability best when she had caused it. I wasn't trying to humiliate you, she said, and for the first time something like softness entered her voice. Maybe genuine. Maybe tactical. At that point it hardly mattered. You just found efficient alternatives. I said. She let out a breath. This was supposed to stay contained until I figured things out. That sentence almost made me dizzy. Contained. As if my marriage were a spill in a conference room. As if my life was a risk event she planned to manage after quarter close. Were you ever going to choose me? I asked. Her eyes flicked away. Answer enough. She picked up the sunglasses again. I need to go. Before you do, I said, tell me one thing honestly. Not strategically. Not elegantly. Honestly. When did you start being ashamed of me? That landed. She went very still. For a moment I thought she might refuse. Then she said, slowly, I was never ashamed of you. I was frustrated by how comfortable you were staying yourself in rooms where everyone else was constantly adapting. I laughed once. That's a beautiful sentence. It's also nonsense. No, it isn't. You don't understand the cost of entry in certain spaces. I understand it perfectly now, I said. It was me. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Picked up her weekender. Have your attorney contact mine, she said. And just like that, she made it official. Not with remorse. With delegation. After she left, I stood in the bedroom and surveyed the sections of closet she had emptied. There were clean, pale rectangles where her shoe boxes had been. Hangers swayed lightly in the conditioned air. On the dresser, a bobby pin and a hotel key sleeve from Palm Beach remained beside her jewelry tray like little fossils of carelessness. The sleeve had the crest of the Seabrook Club embossed in navy. Palm Beach. Leah had mentioned it. I picked it up using a tissue and set it in a file envelope. This is what betrayal turns you into. Not a movie hero. Not a lunatic. A clerk of your own ruin. That afternoon I met with my finance director, Mara, under the pretense of a routine quarter-end review. Mara has worked with me for 9 years. She can smell withheld context the way some people smell rain. Halfway through our numbers, she looked over the rim of her glasses and said, "Who are we freezing and why?" I considered lying. Then decided against it. "Camille and I are separating," I said. "Effective immediately. I need any card or reimbursement linked to household accounts paused pending legal review." Quietly. Mara blinked once. Understood. She didn't offer sympathy. Another reason I value her. In business crises, pity wastes time. Also, I said, pull any charges over $2,000 on the supplementary household card for the last 18 months and flag travel weekends. She nodded, fingers already moving. You suspect misuse. I suspect more than that. But let's start with misuse. By 5 p.m. Mara had sent me a preliminary spreadsheet that made the back of my neck go cold. Hotel stays in Montauk, Boston, Palm Beach, and one in Charleston Camille had told me was a same-day conference. Restaurant charges inconsistent with solo business travel. A floral subscription sent every Friday for 10 weeks to an address on East 63rd I didn't recognize. Ride-share patterns bouncing between Rowan Vale's office, Daniel Mercer's neighborhood on the Upper East Side. And that same East 63rd address. I zoomed in on the line items. The flowers were billed under a boutique service I remembered because Camille once mocked their arrangements as trying too hard to look accidental. Apparently they were perfect when sent to a hidden life. I copied the address into a search map. A pre-war rental building with doorman service. Not ostentatious. Tasteful. The kind of place ambitious people describe as understated because they want luxury to sound like discipline. I didn't go there. I wanted to. Instead I called Graham. He listened to the new details in silence. Then he said, "Good." I almost hung up on him. Explain how any of this is good. Because ambiguity protects cheaters. Records don't. He was right again. I hated that I needed him to be. That night my mother called. Not because she knew anything yet. Because mothers possess their own weather systems. "You sound strange," she said after hello. I was leaning against the kitchen counter staring at an untouched bowl of pasta that had congealed into something architectural. Long day. She made the small disappointed sound she used when she knew she was being offered half a truth. Is Camille all right? There was no good way to introduce catastrophe into a Tuesday call. So I said the cleanest version. Camille and I are having serious problems. My mother went quiet. Then. Do you want me to come down? That nearly broke me. Not because I needed help packing evidence or changing codes. Because in one sentence she offered what Camille hadn't in months. Presence without agenda. Not yet, I said. But maybe soon. All right. I love you. Eat something. And Adrian? Yeah. When people do cruel things, don't start helping them explain why it wasn't cruel. I closed my eyes. My mother taught second grade, not law. Still, she had just summarized the entire week ahead better than most therapists probably could. The next morning, Wednesday, the first institutional crack appeared. Not from Camille. From Daniel. He emailed me. Not to apologize. Of course not. Men like Daniel don't apologize first. They assess leverage. Subject line, we should speak. Body, Adrian, I believe there has been a misunderstanding created by an awkward moment at the event. I respect that emotions may be high. For everyone's sake, I'd appreciate the opportunity to have a private conversation and clear the air. For everyone's sake. Not yours. Not Camille's. Everyone's. Meaning his firm. His donors. His advancement. His image. I forwarded the email to Graham and did not reply. 5 minutes later Graham wrote back. Absolutely not. Silence is oxygen deprivation for people like this. So I gave Daniel nothing. By noon Camille had retained counsel, which I learned because her attorney sent a polished preliminary note suggesting an amicable temporary arrangement while both parties considered long-term options. Amicable. Another elegant word. The professional classes are never short on vocabulary for ugliness. That same afternoon, however, something happened that Camille could not narratively control. Mara found the reimbursement attachments. Not all of them. Enough. She knocked on my office door, stepped in, and closed it behind her. I shouldn't have this on my desk, she said. Setting down a folder. It came through a legacy sync because one of the household card charges cross-posted against a client entertainment ledger before we separated permissions. But now that I've seen it, you need to see it. Inside were scanned event documents from Palm Beach. Guest manifest. Travel booking sheet. Room allocation memo. And there, in clean black type beneath Camille Avery, was spouse, Daniel Mercer. I looked at the line until the letters blurred. This was no longer rumor or implication or a red heart under a comment. This was documentation. Official enough that somebody, somewhere, had processed it as routine. Mara watched my face carefully. Do you need me to keep digging? Yes, I said. But only what can be obtained through normal business channels. No heroics. She nodded. Understood. After she left, I sat alone with the folder and recognized the real reason the ballroom scene had hit so hard. It wasn't just that Camille had betrayed me. It was that she had converted a private betrayal into public infrastructure. She hadn't merely lied in moments of pressure. She had built forms around the lie. Travel around it. Hospitality around it. An entire soft administrative world where Daniel could occupy my place without resistance. And the more I uncovered, the less this felt like one bad decision under fluorescent ambition. It felt like rehearsal for a full replacement. I began to understand that the event wasn't the start of the story. It was the first time the story forgot to keep me out of the room. Thursday morning started with a call from someone I hadn't expected. Evelyn Price. Chief Operating Officer at Rowan Vale. I knew the name because Camille said it the way ambitious people say the names of gatekeepers, half respect, half weather report. I had met Evelyn once 2 years earlier at a museum fundraiser where Camille still found it useful to introduce me properly. Evelyn had been brisk, observant, and too smart to waste time pretending not to notice dynamics other people missed. Her assistant asked if I had 10 minutes for a confidential matter. I almost declined. Then instinct overruled pride. Yes, I said. Evelyn came on the line without fluff. Mr. Cross, thank you for taking the call. I want to be respectful of boundaries, so I'll keep this narrow. Internal questions have arisen regarding certain representations made at Tuesday's event and in prior travel documentation. Before this becomes a formal employment matter, I need to ask one direct question. Are you legally married to Camille Cross, professionally known as Camille Avery? There are questions so simple they feel obscene. Yes, I said. We have been married 6 years. A short silence. Then Evelyn said, very evenly, thank you. That is what I needed. What's happening? What should have happened earlier, she said. Verification. I waited. She didn't rush. I liked her for that despite everything. A donor's spouse posted event photos last night, she continued. In one image, Camille is visible with Mr. Mercer. The caption referred to them as married. Separately, someone in our events team raised a concern that similar assumptions have been allowed to stand before. That triggered review. During review, inconsistencies appeared in travel manifests and hospitality approvals. I'm not asking you for materials. Yet. I am informing you, as a matter of courtesy, that your name came up because someone finally did the obvious thing and checked public records. Public records. It had taken them this long. All that polish, all those budgets, all those donor memos, and the first real act of due diligence was a county clerk's database. I appreciate the courtesy, I said. Evelyn's voice softened by maybe 5%. For what it's worth, Mr. Cross, the people who failed here were not you. That did something to my chest I wasn't prepared for. Because betrayal distorts scale. After a while you start unconsciously assuming every room will side with the better-dressed liar. Hearing one person inside her world refuse that script mattered more than I wanted it to. Thank you, I said. If counsel reaches out, I assume you have representation. I do. Good. Then I'll let the process unfold. After the call ended, I sat still for a full minute. Then I called Graham. He answered with, please tell me you didn't volunteer anything stupid. Only my existence. I relayed the call. He whistled low. That's faster than I expected. Means either internal politics were already swirling or somebody inside wants this cleaned up before the board asks questions. Does that help me? It helps truth. Which is the closest cousin you'll get this week? By lunchtime the first counteroffensive arrived. Not from Rowan Vale. From Camille's sister, Nora. Nora and I have never been particularly close, but we've maintained a kind of civil in-law relationship built on birthdays, wine, and mutual tolerance. She called and said, without greeting, what did you do to Camille? I almost admired the efficiency. Interesting opening, I said. She says you've become vindictive and invasive and that you're threatening her career because you found out about a harmless misunderstanding at work. There it was. The draft narrative. Too controlling to evolve gracefully. Too provincial to understand elite spaces. Too emotional to separate marriage from career. I walked to the window and looked down at West Broadway traffic sliding through slush. Nora, I said, if your sister told you she introduced another man as her husband in public while still legally married to me, used joint funds to support the relationship, and may have listed him as her spouse on corporate travel documents, would you still be leading with what did I do? Silence. Then, smaller, she said it wasn't like that. It's exactly like that. Nora exhaled. I knew there was someone. I didn't know about the forms. The world keeps disappointing you in layers. How long have you known? I asked. A few months. Sort of. She said you two were basically done and that the paperwork was lagging because you were stubborn about the apartment. I closed my eyes. Of course. In Camille's version, I wasn't husband. I was paperwork. An administrative lag in the launch of her improved life. We were not done, I said. We were married enough for her to keep using our accounts. Married enough for me to keep funding her world. Married enough for her to send me running across Manhattan with a presentation clicker. Nora made a small strangled sound. God. Yeah. When she spoke again, the certainty was gone. I'm sorry. I genuinely didn't know it was that bad. There are apologies that repair. And apologies that merely confirm how alone you've already been. Hers was the second kind. Still, before hanging up, Nora said something useful. She's staying at a furnished place on East 63rd, she murmured. I think Daniel arranged it. She told our mother it was temporary until she finalized next steps. The floral subscription. The address. Not theoretical anymore. I thanked her and ended the call. That evening Graham and I met in person with a forensic accountant he trusted, a patient woman named Denise who dressed like a professor and spoke like a surgeon. She reviewed the spreadsheets, card history, and travel anomalies without visible judgment. If this were purely marital, she said, tapping the Palm Beach manifest, my advice would be to quantify misuse and preserve evidence. But if corporate funds or donor-hosted hospitality were misrepresented, the larger issue is institutional exposure. Companies do not enjoy discovering that image management crossed into false records. Particularly not firms that curate trust for wealthy clients. Meaning? I asked. Meaning if Rowan Vale decides to protect itself aggressively, Camille and Mr. Mercer may stop being your biggest problem. A part of me wanted satisfaction from that. Another part just felt tired. Tired enough that even revenge sounded like more administration. Friday morning I learned Daniel finally understood silence wasn't going to save him. He showed up at my office. Not in person inside, Mara would have had him removed before his second step. He sent his card up through reception with a note. I think man to man is best. I laughed so hard Mara came to the door. Should I be concerned? She asked. I handed her the card. She read it and rolled her eyes. Classic. He thinks we're in a cigar commercial. Do you want me to tell security to lose the card? I considered it. Then said, no. Scan it first. Then lose it. There are small pleasures in catastrophe. We take them where we can. Around 2 that afternoon, Camille finally called from a number I didn't recognize, presumably because I'd stopped taking her usual calls. Against my better judgment, I answered. What now? I asked. No hello from either of us. We were past ceremony. Her voice was frayed around the edges for the first time all week. Did you speak to Evelyn Price? She called. And I confirmed I'm your husband. Felt relevant. Camille inhaled sharply. Do you understand what you've done? That question was so pure in its self-centeredness that for a moment I couldn't speak. Then I said, very quietly, do you? This is spiraling because you are choosing to be punitive instead of private. Private ended when you performed my replacement under chandeliers. You could have just let me manage the transition. I turned away from Mara's glass-walled office because I didn't want an audience for what came next. The transition. Yes. From what, exactly? Wife to employee-facing fiction. Husband to reimbursement donor. Human being to scheduling conflict. She didn't answer that. Instead she said, there are board members asking questions. Daniel's under review. Evelyn is treating this like some kind of ethics breach instead of a personal matter. Maybe because it is one. Adrian, please. That word from her used to melt me. Now it sounded like budget pressure. What do you want? I asked. And there it was. The actual ask. I want you to tell them this separation has been informal for months. I want you to say we were functionally over and that any language used at events reflected a complicated reality, not intentional deception. If you just say that, it calms the whole thing down. I laughed once, stunned. She wanted me to underwrite the lie retroactively. To make myself complicit in the erasure. To donate my own dignity as a final marital asset. No, I said. You're being cruel. No. I'm being unavailable. There's a difference. Her voice cracked then, finally, but not in the way I'd once prayed to hear if she ever hurt me. Not with remorse. With fear. You have no idea what I'll lose, she whispered. I stood very still with the phone against my ear. Because here, at last, was the real center of her panic. Not us. Not what she had done. Not the 6 years she'd set on fire. Loss of altitude. Loss of access. Loss of the audience she had bent herself around. I know exactly what losing feels like, I said. You taught me Tuesday night. I hung up. An hour later Graham called. Whatever you just said worked, he said. How can you tell? Camille's attorney suddenly wants to discuss settlement posture and reputational containment in separate tracks. Which means work is no longer a background issue. Translation. Translation, the building's on fire and they're asking whether the drapes are negotiable. That weekend should have been miserable. In some ways it was. I signed preliminary separation documents. Boxed up the last of Camille's toiletries. Found one of her earrings behind the nightstand and had to sit on the floor for a full 5 minutes because my body still recognized the object before my mind reclassified it as debris. But something else happened too. Distance created clarity. Without Camille in the apartment, the rooms got quieter in a way that initially felt brutal and then, unexpectedly, honest. I wasn't bracing for explanations. I wasn't measuring whether a key in the lock sounded guilty. I wasn't participating in my own soft gaslighting anymore. On Sunday my mother came down from Yonkers carrying lasagna, 2 grocery bags, and the absolute refusal to treat me like a victimized mascot. She hugged me hard at the door, took one look around, and said, "Good. At least the apartment still has some self-respect." I barked out a laugh. She unpacked food while I told her the broad version. Not every detail. A son does not need to narrate corporate infidelity and falsified spouse manifests over ricotta. But enough. When I finished, she wiped her hands on a dish towel and said, "Ambition is fine. Hunger is fine. But once somebody starts believing love should be grateful to share a room with their aspiration, they are already halfway gone." Then she handed me a fork and made me eat. Monday brought the formal explosion. Rowan Vale placed Camille and Daniel on administrative leave pending internal review. I know this not because anyone at the firm announced it publicly, but because Camille called 17 times between 8:14 and 9:03 a.m., and when I didn't answer, she sent a single text. They suspended us. Are you happy now? I looked at the message for a long time. Then I forwarded it to Graham without comment. He called a minute later. Do not respond. Wasn't planning to. Good. Because that text is a gift. It frames consequence as your emotional choice instead of institutional reaction. Very revealing. Everything she says is revealing now. Only because you're finally translating it correctly. That afternoon Evelyn Price called again. This time there was less courtesy and more procedure. She asked whether I would be willing, through counsel, to authenticate several documents and provide a short statement confirming the duration of my marriage and the fact that no separation had been formalized before the event. Graham handled the logistics. I agreed. Not out of revenge. I need to say that because people hear stories like this and imagine the betrayed spouse sitting in the dark fantasizing about career annihilation. That wasn't me. By Monday I didn't want to destroy Camille. I wanted to stop protecting her from the natural shape of what she had done. There is a difference. One is vengeance. The other is gravity. The following Thursday I gave a statement at Graham's office in the presence of external counsel for Rowan Vale. Short. Precise. Dates only. Marriage certificate. Residential records. Joint tax filings. Nothing dramatic. No editorializing about the ballroom or the clicker or the way she had looked at Daniel under the winter branch lights. Facts are strongest when they don't beg for emotion. As I was leaving, I saw Daniel in the corridor outside another conference room. First close look since the gala. He was exactly what I expected up close. Good bone structure. Excellent tailoring. The kind of confidence that comes from never having to wonder whether a room was built with people like you in mind. But he looked different now too. Paler. Tighter around the eyes. Like somebody had informed him that consequence was not, in fact, a concept reserved for other men. He stepped toward me. Graham was half a beat ahead, moving to intercept, but I lifted a hand. Let him talk. Daniel stopped about 5 feet away. I never meant for it to happen like this, he said. Astonishing sentence. As if there had been a preferred choreography for my humiliation and he regretted only the staging. How did you mean for it to happen? I asked. He swallowed. Camille said your marriage had been dead for a long time. I nodded slowly. And that made you comfortable calling yourself my replacement before the paperwork, the apartment, or the truth had caught up. He looked away. It wasn't like that. Apparently that phrase is handed out in bulk to adulterers. Then what was it like? He didn't answer. Because all affairs sound sophisticated from the inside and stupid once translated. I stepped closer, not enough to threaten, just enough to make sure he heard every word. Whatever she told you about me, I said, you knew enough to avoid daylight. Men who believe they're acting honorably don't need side entrances and donor optics. His jaw flexed. For a second I thought he might try the masculine thing, raise his voice, assert parity, turn shared wrongdoing into tragic complexity. Instead he did something smaller and truer. He said, I'm sorry. Maybe he meant it. Maybe he only meant that his promotion track was dying in real time. Either way, it arrived too late to matter. I left without answering. 2 weeks later Camille requested a direct meeting. Not through counsel exactly. Adjacent to counsel. She said there were personal items and one unresolved financial discussion that could be handled faster face to face. Graham advised against it. I agreed on one condition, public place, midday, his paralegal within sight. We met at a private room in a hotel lounge on Hudson Street. The irony of hotels did not escape me. Camille arrived 10 minutes early, which meant she was nervous. She only does early when control feels fragile. She wore a cream blouse, no ring, minimal jewelry, and the kind of understated makeup women in crisis choose when they want to look serious rather than stunning. It almost worked. For one split second, when she stood as I entered, I saw the woman from the courthouse photo. Then she spoke. You look well, she said. I sat down. I'm sleeping. That's new. Her mouth tightened. A server poured water and vanished. For a moment neither of us touched our glasses. Finally Camille said, they're asking for my resignation. Not hello. Not I shouldn't have done this. Just the current market valuation of her choices. I folded my hands. I figured. Daniel was terminated yesterday. I said nothing. She looked at me hard, as if still hoping to find some crude triumph she could point to and call disproportional. You could stop some of this, she said. No. If you clarified. No. Her eyes flashed. You don't even know what I was going to ask. Yes, I said. I do. You were going to ask me to become useful one last time. That silenced her. Good. Because I was finally done donating labor to the machine that injured me. After a long pause, she said, quieter, I did love you. The sentence hung there between us like something rescued from a fire and offered as proof the house had once been worth saving. I believed her, actually. That was the tragedy. I think she had loved me. In the way she knew how. Fully, for a while. Until love started competing with a version of herself she found more intoxicating. I know, I said. Her eyes widened slightly. She hadn't expected generosity. She always mistook clarity for cruelty and sentiment for mercy. Then why are you looking at me like this? She whispered. I thought about that. Then answered honestly. Because love isn't the part I'm evaluating anymore. Character is. That landed harder than any shout would have. Her shoulders dropped. For the first time since Tuesday night, she looked tired in a human way instead of an aesthetic one. I thought I could keep the world separate until I knew what I wanted, she said. You already knew what you wanted. You just wanted me to keep funding the runway while you taxied toward it. She looked down. No denial. Outside the glass partition, Graham's paralegal pretended to review email while very obviously making sure the meeting remained uneventful. Camille traced a bead of condensation down her water glass. I hated how small I felt sometimes next to your certainty, she said. That surprised me enough that I listened. What certainty? About yourself. About where you belonged. You can walk into any room and remain exactly who you are. I always envied that. At Rowan Vale I learned to adapt because adaptation got rewarded. Then eventually I didn't know if I was adapting anymore or replacing parts. Daniel understood that version of me without asking questions. There it was. Maybe the closest thing to truth I would get. Not because Daniel was better. Because he belonged to the performance instead of interrupting it. And I reminded you of the original draft, I said. A faint nod. I sat back. The odd thing was, hearing it out loud did not rescue anything. It just made the ruin comprehensible. Camille looked up again. I never meant to make you feel cheap. Intent is overrated, I said. Impact is what people live with. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, the steel was back, though thinner now. My attorney says the apartment buyout number is unrealistic. And there it was. Back to terms. Back to extraction. Familiar territory. I almost smiled. Some people can confess only in the margins before retreating to transaction. It is the only language that keeps them from feeling seen too clearly. We spent the next 20 minutes discussing figures, furnishings, and the division of a life once we stopped pretending the life itself was under negotiation. By the end, most points were resolved. When I stood to leave, Camille said my name. I turned. For what it's worth, she said, when I saw you in that ballroom doorway, even before I knew what you'd heard, I felt ashamed. I believed her. And somehow that was the saddest part. Because shame arrived not when she crossed the line. Not when she lied. Not when she built paperwork around it. Only when the person she'd edited out reappeared in frame. You should have, I said. Then I left. The divorce finalized 4 months later. Clean, by legal standards. Expensive, by ordinary ones. Camille resigned from Rowan Vale before the internal report concluded. Daniel disappeared into some family office role in Connecticut, according to mutual whispers I neither encouraged nor corrected. The East 63rd apartment was given up by spring. People who build relationships on curation rarely enjoy life once the lighting changes. As for me, something quieter happened. I stopped confusing usefulness with love. That was the deepest cut Camille left, and also the most valuable scar. For years I had measured devotion by what I could absorb. The extra bill. The late pickup. The changed plan. The social slight. The forgotten invitation. The missing ring. I called it patience. Often it was just fear of being difficult. After the divorce, I learned a different skill. To let unanswered things stay loud. To ask direct questions before resentment calcified into biography. To notice when I was being recast in my own life and refuse the audition. About 8 months after the gala, I ran into Leah outside a coffee shop near Bryant Park. She had left Rowan Vale and joined a smaller foundation where, she said, people still lie, just with lower production values. I laughed and bought her coffee. She told me the internal review had widened far beyond the spouse issue. Expense practices. Donor hospitality irregularities. Too much informality between institutional relationships and personal branding. The usual rot that flourishes when everybody assumes presentation is substance. You okay? She asked before we parted. I considered the honest answer. Better than I was, I said. Smarter than I wanted to become. She nodded like that made sense. It did. Last month, almost a year after the event, I was invited to a Preservation Award dinner at the New Amsterdam Hall, one of the oldest restoration projects my company ever completed. I almost declined. Black tie had lost some charm. Then I went anyway. Not to prove anything. Just because I was tired of letting one night lease too much space in my future. The ballroom looked different from Halcyon Tower. Older wood. Better acoustics. Less desperation trying to pass as elegance. A developer's wife I vaguely knew approached me near the bar with a bright smile and a man beside her. Adrian, she said, I don't think you've met my husband. For the briefest second the room tilted with memory. Then it steadied. I shook the man's hand, introduced myself, and felt nothing but the ordinary weight of being present under my own name. Later that night, standing near the stage while the band tuned up, I caught my reflection in a dark window. Same shoulders. Same face. Same man, mostly. Just less willing now to be translated by somebody who needed me smaller than I was. People ask, when they hear the clean version of what happened. Whether I wish I'd confronted Camille in the ballroom. Whether I wish I'd walked straight through the donors and the champagne and the quartet and said, loudly enough for all of Manhattan to hear, actually, I'm her husband. Sometimes, in weaker moods, I imagine it. The shock. The dropped flute. The blood draining from Daniel's face. The donors suddenly fascinated by their own shoes. Would it have felt good? For a minute, probably. But here's what I've learned. Public scenes are theater. Consequences are architecture. One gives you noise. The other changes where people are forced to live. Camille built a structure out of omission, vanity, borrowed titles, and my misplaced loyalty. I didn't have to burn it down. I just had to stop holding it up. And once I did, gravity handled the rest. If there's a lesson in any of this, it's not the tired one about revenge. It isn't even about infidelity. Not really. It's about the moment you realize somebody has started treating your steadiness as scenery. Your generosity as infrastructure. Your silence as consent. The first time that happens, name it. The second time, document it. The third time, leave before they teach themselves that your dignity is a renewable resource. Because the most dangerous lies aren't always the loud ones. Sometimes they're spoken softly under expensive lights with a smile practiced for donors. Sometimes they're wrapped in words like optics and transition and complicated reality. Sometimes they arrive in a single sentence while you're standing 3 feet behind the person you built your life around, holding the thing they forgot, ready to help one more time. And in that moment, if you're lucky, heartbreak will do you one final kindness. It will introduce the truth as clearly as they introduced the man replacing you. My wife smiled at a room full of important people, touched another man's sleeve, and said he was her husband. She was wrong. He never was. But neither, by that point, was she really my wife. Not in the ways that mattered. Not in the ways that survived the lights coming on. And once I understood that, I stopped asking to be reintroduced. I walked out under my own name instead.